Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing and Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host James. James, how are you doing? Are you ready for this week's conversation?
I'm always ready to talk about Magic cards.
We do love a little bit of Magic the Gathering, and today we have a fun one. Today we are going to be talking about the best counterspells in Cube. So, before we kind of jump into our episode, a few things to kind of talk about, and that primarily, we're not going to be talking about every counterspell ever printed. This is not a we rank all 500 counterspells episode, because realistically, there's only about 20 or so cards that see play in most cubes. There's only like so many slots for counterspells in cube. Like in a 360, you might have between like 8 and 10. In a 450, you might have between 10 and 12. In a 540, in a 540 size cube, somewhere between 12 and 14, and in a 720, like 14 to 20, that kind of thing. There is a very strong, very solid pool of counterspells that we're going to be talking about for you to choose from, basically, and we're going to be kind of discussing why they are good, and we're going to kind of, ranking isn't the right word, but kind of going to be grouping them and talking about the most optimal in the vast majority of situations.
Yeah, for sure. And what counterspells you should put in what cubes, right? Because I think often the nature of what permission you include in a cube is actually pretty impactful often to how the cube plays out, even though it's quite a small number of cards most of the time. So these can be the cards that frequently do swing games.
Yeah, I'll be honest, counterspells ruined my first couple of years of playing Magic. All I want to do was play Lano RLs into my Craw Worm. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean my spell's gone?
Yeah, I was definitely on the opposite side of this. I think the first time I watched professional Magic was Ivan Floch winning a Pro Tour with blue-white control, where the win condition was Elixir of Immortality to reshuffle and casting a million Sphinx's Revelations. And then that was just all I did in Standard for my first 2 years of playing Magic. I had a great time, personally.
That's dreadful, James, and you should feel bad.
Yeah, I hate to tell you, this is the sort of Magic flair I am at heart.
Oh, I know, all good. But yeah, so I think kind of the first place to start, James, is let's start very high view, okay? Why are decks running counterspells? What are we trying to do with them?
Counterspells are, firstly, the main way you get to interact in blue, right? Blue does not get removal, or blue doesn't get good removal. But more than that, counterspells let you interact with classes of cards that most other interaction doesn't, right? Your removal spell can't stop their card draw spell. Your protection spell can't stop their creature. Counterspells are interaction most of the time, but works against pretty much anything. Obviously, there's exceptions like uncounterable spells, but in general, stuff that says counter target spell works against pretty much everything. So you can use it to stop your opponent's threats, because often, even when they're playing creatures, a lot of creatures come with ETBs. So your opponent would still get value out of it if you remove it with a removal spell. A counterspell never hits the board. They get no value. You stop it. They can also let you trade up on mana. This is a really big deal. If you use a 2-mana spell to stop their 6-mana spell, that's put you at a huge advantage. You could be spending the 4 mana you were up on that exchange on a threat of your own. That is often how you get ahead in a game of Magic. And you can use it as an extra level of protection to protect your own proactive plays, which is generally a thing which you need to have very cheap counterspells for that to work, because you're deploying them alongside a threat, but that can be very powerful too.
Yeah, definitely. Let's kind of talk about the sections today. So we've kind of broken this down into a couple of different categories. The first section is counterspells that can go in basically every cube. Like, the caveat to this is kind of every cube that's looking to curve out. There's a few cubes where they're trying to not do anything until turn 5. In those scenarios, cheap counter magic is kind of backbreaking, and you need to adjust your curve accordingly. But basically, we are talking about the majority of cubes that you will play on Mitgo, the majority of cubes that you will play in person. Kind of like my main cube, James's main powered cube, that kind of stuff. Like any cube where the goal is to on turn 1, play a 1-drop, on turn 2, play a 2-drop, on turn 3, play a 3-drop, that kind of thing. Just like your bog standard curvy out cube. These are the counterspells that you are going to see in those environments. First one to talk about, it's a classic for a reason, James. Actual factual counterspell. Blue instant counter target spell. Very good, very backbreaking. The green player in me fears seeing double blue being left up. This is the epitome of everything that James talked about before. It interacts with the opponent. It stops threats. It gives you that tempo advantage and can often go up on mana. Because it's only 2 mana to counter anything. Very solid card.
Yeah, Counterspell, very solid. Probably at its best, probably one of the best ones here for an actual control deck, right? Because it's, unlike some of the other ones we'll talk about, this is good for the entirety of the game. There's no limitation on it. It never becomes bad, and it deals with a threat permanently.
Counterspell, all right, very obvious to talk about in an episode about counterspells. Next up is a card called Lose Focus. I think this card is really strong. 1 blue, instant, replicate for a blue, which means when you cast a spell, copy it for each time you pay this replicate cost. You may choose new targets for the copies. And counter target spell unless its controller pays 2 generic. So this is a nice little counter spell that does scale as the game goes. It can be less mana efficient because you have to put more blue mana into it if your opponent has more mana. But the majority of the time, again, when your opponent is trying to play out on curve, this counters the Minsk and Boo on turn 4. It does what you need to do most of the time. But what puts this above other, like Quench, I believe is the correct term, Quench variants of just 2 mana counter target spell unless the controller pays 2, is the ability to scale into the late game, and Loose Focus is really good at that.
Yeah, I really like this one. I think it's pretty underrated, actually. Like the difference between blue and 1 blue is huge. It's why I've in certain cubes, it certainly doesn't apply for all cubes, but I've often argued that you should take cards like Mana Leak over straight up Counterspell because they just go in more decks. This gives you that. It lets you cast it for 1 blue early game. It's going to counter most stuff for the first few turns of the game. But unlike some of those other conditional counters later on, this isn't dead. It essentially just becomes less efficient. It needs to be because the thing is, if you play 1 blue, counter unless they pay 4 basically counters almost everything for almost all of the game. So you can kind of think about this as a quench that becomes a cancel when it needs to later. And I think that's really strong. I like this a lot better, for example, than something like a Miscalculation where it's the same for 2 mana, but it gives you the upside of you can cycle it later. Well, I don't really want to I don't want to have to cycle my counterspell later. I want it to keep being a good counterspell, and Lose Focus does that.
Yeah, definitely. You've touched on 2 cards that we are going to talk about. So Mana Leak is a similar effect. So 1 blue, instant counter target spell unless the controller pays 3. Most of the time, that 3 mana is really tricky to pay. Effectively, this is a full counter the majority of the time until very late in the game, in which case, tough luck. But the majority of the time, you snap this off quite early on in the game, and you will counter the things. But like, as spells are getting, as threats are getting cheaper, so as like Questing Beast is 4 mana, whereas previously you would have been 6 mana for that power and stats. Mana Leak will continue to get better because it is better earlier in the game, and as threats get cheaper, it is fantastic at countering those type of cards that you want to counter. Again, like we mentioned Minsk and Boo, this is great at countering the Minsk and Boo. It does what you need when you want it to.
Yeah, I really like Mana Leak. I will say I think it is better in decks which are trying to end the game fairly promptly. It does run into issues if you're in a full-on control deck, because very late in the game, this does become dead. And often, if you're playing a control deck and you have, say, actual counterspell in your hand, you're going to be and you're not immediately getting run over. You're going to be very selective about when you use that counterspell. You're going to be sitting there saying, like, well, I can let that threat through because I can use my removal spell on that. I can let that card draw spell through because I want to save the counter spell for the thing I can't interact with anything else, right? Counter spells the interaction that basically works against everything in that scenario. Mana Leak doesn't really let you do that because you're kind of on a clock to use it. You're aware that if you still have this Mana Leak in your hand and it's turn 10, then it's not going to counter a lot of what you need to counter, right? But having said that, it's very efficient. It's very easy to cast, and most cube decks aren't like that. Right? Most cube decks are trying to end the game, and this is very good at trading up mana and helping you turn the game into your advantage.
No, definitely. A couple more I want to touch on, and then we'll kind of, I guess, go into a bit more detail, kind of like why these are good. Is Remand, tempo classic, 1 blue, instant, counter target spell. That spell is countered this way, put it into its owner's hand instead of into that player's graveyard, and draw a card. So card advantage on a counter spell is great. Obviously, with this, you do have the thing of they can get it next turn. But that is such a big tempo swing. Like, if that's all they were doing on that turn, effectively that's a time warp or time walk. Effectively, you just reset them. And also, say they've done that on turn 3, maybe they don't want to replay their 3-drop on turn 4. Maybe they want to play a different spell, in which case, effectively, you have delayed that spell quite a bit longer. And it draws you a card. I'm assuming, James, you're a big fan of Remand.
Love a Remand. Yeah, very much, again, a counterspell at its best in decks that are not necessarily aggressive decks, but decks that are doing something proactive along with it, right? Because this doesn't deal with a threat permanently, so it's maybe not its best in a control deck, but it does give you a huge amount of tempo. It keeps the cards flowing. And you're very right to say, if sometimes you can remand something that's basically only going to be good that turn. It's not going to be good on a future turn, right? Say you remand their Signet on turn 2. Maybe don't want to spend turn 3 playing a Signet, and then the Signet ends up getting stuck in their hand, and by the time they play it, it doesn't matter anymore. It's also really good at if you can remand something like a card draw spell or an expensive card draw spell, and then you can push that tempo advantage. They maybe don't have time to tap out for a card draw spell again because they just need to be affecting the board, and those tempo advantages can be a huge deal.
Yeah, and they kind of go up if they've had to invest additional resources. So maybe if they've sacked some treasure, or maybe they dealt some cards away to cast their big impactful spell. It's kind of similar to like bouncing the reanimate target. They might not always be able to get the same thing off again and again. Technically, a different magic card is Reprieve. This is 1 and a white to return target spell to its owner's hand and draw a card. So technically different, but a similar type of effect. And I know the blue-white mages in our playgroup were very excited when this card got spoiled. And then another similar type of card is Memory Lapse. 1 blue, instant, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of into that player's graveyard. So slightly more of a delay on the spell. It's going back on top of the deck. Again, similar thing. They might not want to. They might, like, you are mucking up the opportunity for them to cast it. They might not want to do it on the next turn. Very, very solid. So these are kind of like the key list of like cards that I think anyway can go into literally any cube. The reason for that is all of these are fantastically cheap magic cards. Like effectively, it's what version of art do you want is going to make the counterspell more expensive rather than availability of cards. So they're all fantastically cheap, meaning that they can go in any budget of cube. They're all relatively easy to cast. These are all less than 2 mana. One thing to touch on is while counterspell is probably the strongest in terms of just like the effect is the strongest because it's 2 mana to stop the spell, it goes away. It might not be one that we take higher because the double blue pips push you higher into, like, 2 blue pips is a cost. Like, pack one, pick one, James. Say it's a middling pack and there's a counterspell and a mana leak, for example. Which one are you taking?
It completely depends on what cube I am drafting.
Yeah, okay.
Take the example of like current Modo Vintage Cube as I sit now, I would be a proponent for taking the Mana Leak because I think that locking yourself into a deck that can make blue that early is kind of tough. Like, you need to be quite heavy blue for Counterspell, whereas Mana Leak goes in just almost any deck with any islands. But if it was, vintage cube of 5 years ago, I'd probably have said Counterspell. And a lot of other cubes where I think you have a bit more time and you can fix your mana a bit, or just cubes where I feel more confident saying early if I'm going to be heavy blue, then sure, I'd take Counterspell. It is a better effect for 2 mana.
No, very nice. But yeah, these cards are these are all commons and uncommons. There's something to consider as well. These can all go in peasant upwards. And why these are great is they do scale with the threats. They are solid in a peasant cube where, again, you are probably not a crawl worm, but the 6 mana beefy green variant. These will counter those when you need them to. But again, they can be in powered cube. They can counter a demonic tutor or whatever. They can counter your high impactful cards. Them scaling to the power level cube is fantastic because they do their thing. They work around the environment that they're in very well.
Yes, for sure. I think these are very accessible. They will be powerful in basically any cube you put them in. They're never going to feel too good in the sense that they're, the only thing going on in the cube they're dominating. But I will say that if you feel like your cube is in a spot where people are only playing the cheap cards and the expensive cards aren't cutting it anymore, if you have a bunch of 2 mana counterspells, that might be why, because these are very, very punishing for people trying to cast more expensive cards. Getting your 6-drop mana leaks and your opponent casting their 2 or 3-drop on the same turn, that swings games so quickly. Counterspells are so much. They're so much less impactful if your opponent's turn 4 is cast 2 2-drops than if it's cast a 4-drop, right? They do exert a lot of downward pressure on people's curves, especially the cheap ones. So I think it is worth bearing in mind to curate your counterspells for the cube experience you want. And if you don't want too much of that pressure to be playing cheap things, then one of the options available to you would be maybe switch one of the 2 mana counterspells to one of the 3 mana counterspells with a bit more upside or whatever, right? Just to give it that little bit of extra breathing room. But these are all very powerful, very flexible cards that will be good in any cube. And I think they do a lot of good for cubes as well. It's just want to put that caveat in there. But
no, I'd agree. Yeah, I agree with that. But they also, they're kind of that nice little safety net, as it were, to kind of stop players just running away with things. But basically, if you just wanted a starting point for a list of counterspells, I think that is a solid place to start. So counterspell, lose focus, mana leak, miscalculation, remand, reprieve, and memory lapse. I think they're all solid. As we go through, we will talk about some more powerful ones, some more interesting ones, tailor to your choices. But one thing to just touch on, just a little difference between some of those, is the difference between soft counters and hard counters. Worth touching on now because we have talked about them. Counterspell is a hard counter. It doesn't have any additional condition to meet. It just says counter target spell. A soft counter is something like Mana Leak, where there is a way out of it for your opponent. Generally speaking, hard counters are better, but as we've discussed, one reason we like Mana Leak is that a lot of the time it is effectively a hard counter because they don't have the mana to do it. Same with loose focus and its replicatability. You can kind of turn your soft counter into a hard counter earlier in the game. Is that fair, James?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it is pretty universally true, right, that all the hard counters are double blue. Anything that counts it unconditionally and deals with effect permanently.
Yes, in terms of permanent. Yeah, because is remand technically a hard counter, or is it a?
Yeah. I don't know how we define this, but something that us unconditionally counters any spell and it goes to the graveyard. I think those are all double blue, right? So the soft counters are making the counter spells available for more decks, because not every deck is going to want a blue spell, a blue 2-drop, right? But if you're in a very heavy blue deck, then obviously like Counterspell is the best one we've talked about, right? Because it deals with the threat forever, regardless of that mana.
Nice, perfect. So let's keep it going. Let's talk about. So those are kind of. If I saw any of those counter spells in a cube list, I would think, fine, awesome, I get it, I know what they're doing. Let's talk about some slightly more specific ones. Let's do these two together because they're, again, basically the same card. Force Spike, single blue, instant counter target spell, unless the controller pays 1 generic. And Mana Tithe, single white, instant counter target spell, unless the controller pays 1. These are not ones for every cube. But I do think so. Mana Tithe has the nice kind of gotcha style environment, but Force Spike has that as well because people don't often suspect. People expect kind of like Mana Leak and Counterspell. They don't often think about Force Spike and Force Spike variants like Mana Tithe. These are by far worse than Mana Leak because it's only 1 mana to counter. So the opportunity cost or the opportunity for you to play them is less because if your opponent at any point doesn't play on curve, then these cards you just can't cast them. But they do have quite a high gotcha moment, and I think they are solid in cubes that are powerful and fast, where you need the ability to interact early with them, but you're not going for the free counter spells, which we will get onto a bit later on.
Yeah, I think they can have their great moments. I'm never a huge fan of them in terms of actually putting them in my decks because I feel like they're just so inconsistent. Like, even if your opponent isn't thinking around it or playing around them at all, it's just so easy for these not to line up properly. And they also have the massive issue that they're horrible against like discard spells and stuff. Like, not in that your opponent will take your Force Spike, it's that they will take your good card and then your Force Spike will never line up. Like, if you keep leaving up a blue, they will not play into your Force Spike, and it's kind of becomes pretty dead. Similarly, like a card has never been wrecked by Gitaxian Probe as badly as Force Spike, right?
Yes. Yeah. I guess Mana Tithe at least has the thing of like expecting it because it's in white.
Yeah, Mana Tithe is at least like if you want that effect in white, that's the one that exists. Like that or reprieve. Whereas Force Spike, I think there are better counters for a single blue mana.
No, I think that's fair. But again, like I do think it's certain cubes might want that effect. Again, if aggro is very, very strong, I think it can be a nice little tool for that. Another card that kind of does a similar, like follows very similarly along with what we were just talking about, and especially it gets so much worse if your opponent knows about it, is Daze. 1 in the blue, you may return an island you control to its owner's hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. The main reason why Daze is great is because you are tapped out, and it is one of the bigger gotchas. It is very much they can't counter my spell, they have no mana. Surprise, return an island, Daze them.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm completely the opposite. I really like Daze. The big difference between Daze and Force Spike is Force Spike, I have to pay the cost of leaving up a blue mana, and then if my opponent doesn't play into it, then I'm just down that mana. Daze, I always have up. I don't have to pay any cost to do that, right? It's always available, and at some point, my opponent's probably going to tap out. I can't tell you if it's going to be this turn or the next turn, but I'm not having to leave up any mana, so I don't need to predict that. At some point, my opponent probably will tap out. When they do tap out, it'll probably be something pretty high impacts, and getting to Daze that could be really good. Obviously, it does have the outside of you don't really want to like return your island to your hand on turn 1, but most of the time you don't need to. Most of the time it will be at some point during the mid game your opponent will tap out and you Daze that spell, and then it's really good.
Just on this actually, because the opportunity cost for Daze, or because the opportunity where Daze is strong is in theory quite small. It's in theory like turn 2 to 4, as it were. Like, how often are you just snapping Daze off for the first thing that you can Daze? Or are you potentially waiting for something later on?
I mean, a lot of it depends on how big the cost of returning the island is. Like, if I don't have any more lands in hand, and
that's fair,
then obviously like it's a much lower cost, right? Whereas if it's I have my next land ready to go and my 5-drop, then I'm going to be very reluctant to return my 4th land to my hand because that's going to delay that 5-drop by a turn. I'll say it's it's getting less likely to be impactful as we go later on, but it's surprising how often you do daze someone on turn 8, because
fair.
they don't have to be casting it, but people just people multi-spell, people build their decks well, so they get to use all their mana going through the game. And because it's always up, right? There's they only have to tap out once and you get something. If it is in that late game, yes, I will daze anything because I don't know when I'm going to next have the opportunity. But it is surprisingly live just because you always have it up,
No, definitely. And also worth saying, Daze does also have the secret tech of costing 2 mana if you have 2 mana later in the game. Yeah, you don't have to return the land, but yeah, very.
The 2 mana thing is very real on holding up hardcast Daze on turn 2 is a very respectable 2-drop because especially if your opponent didn't play something on turn 1, they probably are going to play a 2-drop on turn 2 most of the time, and you really don't want to return your island to your hand on turn 2, so just pass with the hardcast Daze up. It's a very reasonable play.
No, definitely. So kind of like the last week we mentioned, there's a bit more opportunity cost for them. I think we are higher on Daze, but the next couple I think are a bit more deck specific, if that makes sense. Kind of like that's why these are for most or some cubes. The first one on this little section is Cryptic Command. 1 blue, instant, choose to counter target spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand, tap all creatures your opponents control, or draw a card. Very strong. We've all been Cryptic Command. Cryptic Commanded is dreadful. Cryptic Command and some of the others we're going to get to. We'll kind of touch on this now before we talk about the individual cards later on. But Cryptic Command for me does feel a bit more deck specific, and that I mean it needs to be a slower deck. It isn't necessarily I need a blue control deck or I need a white blue control deck. It's more either a control deck existing in your format or a slower deck existing. Something that's fine or is able to get to 3 blue pips for 1, but is fine effectively passing with 4 mana. You need to be like that. That is the definite for me. That is the definition of a slower deck. On turn 4, passing and not doing anything. Or as well, it does this also does have the secret tech of tapping down your opponent's board and then swinging through for the win. Also very, very strong. Or bouncing their key thing. It's a very flexible card. The counterspell part is a part of this card, but it's not because it's more mana, it is more flexible. It can do other things, but I think it's added 2 cubes because it is a counterspell first and foremost.
Yeah, for sure. And it is a very strong one. I think the biggest thing for me is just I want to have around 13 blue sources in my deck before I really want to put Cryptic Command in it. 12-ish maybe. Not saying I haven't run some dubious Cryptic Commands with a lot less than that, but to be really happy about it, you need a lot of blue. But if you get there, it's such a flexible spell, probably the most the most frequently used modes is dismiss, right? Counter spell, draw a card, but it's very the ability to bounce because it bounces any permanent, right? You can bounce a planeswalker that you don't have another way to deal with, and then counter it on the way back down. You can even bounce that land is sometimes surprisingly good. Yeah, and tapping down that team can be huge, right? Just giving you that extra turn can be really powerful. So, yeah, I love Cryptic Command. It is a deck building challenge because, it's not that unusual that there will be no one at the table heavy blue enough to use Cryptic Command. But if someone can use it well, it's really, really good.
A similar sort of spell next in Mystic Confluence. This is another very powerful, but also a bit more chunkier on the mana. This is 3 blue, instant. Choose 3. With this, you can choose the same mode more than once. Counter target spell, NS's controller pays 3. Return target creature to its owner's hand, or draw a card. So this is rarely pay 5 mana, draw 3 cards. It happens, but very rarely. Normally, you are effectively mana leaking something, or maybe double mana leaking something, and getting an additional pip of value on top of that. Maybe you are countering their spell and returning a creature to its own. Like sometimes you can do all three, and that's awesome. Or you can counter a spell and draw 2 cards. But it's why this card is good is because it's yes, it's expensive, but you are getting the counter and some additional tempo value on top of that. So you're drawing some cards as well as countering their spell, or you're bouncing their other big threat to their hand and countering a spell, that kind of stuff. Like this falls under counterspell because normally you're just bouncing 3 things to their hand. You want them to put their mana into something, so you get the tempo blowout of you wrecking their mana for a turn, and then get the additional value of drawing cards or bouncing something as well. That's kind of generally where Mystic Confluence kind of sees play. And similar to Cryptic Command, again, it doesn't need to go in a slightly slower deck because it is 5 mana.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm much happier taking something like Mystic Confluence early, just because it's easier to cast color-wise. So I have confidence that most of my blue decks can probably use Mystic Confluence. And it's just that flexibility that it provides, most of the time you want to use the counterspell mode, but there are a lot of games where bounce 3 creatures is really good. There will be spots where you just draw 3 cards. This is just like if you can make 5 mana, this is going to do something very impactful to your game, And the time when you don't need to be bouncing creatures, like counter your spell, draw 2 is just savage, Love Mystic Confluence. Happy to take it early in most cubes, and it's expensive, but it really pays you off.
And then as we're going up the mana value, we probably have the biggest of the counterspells we're going to be talking about, and also the one with the highest potential blowout. It's Sublime Epiphany. 4 blue, instant, choose 1 or more. Counter target spell. Counter target activated or triggered ability. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, or target player draws a card. So it's 1 or more, so you can do all of those. So this card is an insane blowout. If you can get, normally you can get at least 4 of these. So counter targeting spell, return a non-land permanent to its hand is doable. Create a token, all you need is a thing, and drawing a card. That is a lot. That is a lot of value for 6 mana. I believe I've definitely got all 5. I've completed the trifecta.
Yeah, this card's sick. If you get to land it's really powerful. It is one of those cards where it does get worse when they know you have it in your deck. Because it's so much mana, it can be quite telegraphed, right?
Yes.
But it's
6 is like if you think holding up double blue is a tell, holding up it's a bit of a tell.
But yeah, I mean, when you land this card, it can do some really absurd stuff. Combo to call out as well with Torrential Gearhulk.
Oh, love that! Yeah.
Because so as well as getting all the other value, you can create a token that's a copy of Torrential Gearhulk, and then the Torrential Gearhulk new Torrential Gearhulk flashes back for Sublime Epiphany, which makes another Torrential Gearhulk, and then flashes back something else. So it's but that goes pretty hard. It's also just a very powerful card, though. It's I know I said I liked Mystic Confluence a lot. 6 is kind of pushing it in a lot of cubes. 6 is you have to be either like a hard control deck, or you could try and vamp into this, but generally you want your vamps targets to be a bit more like proactive, right? So it's probably not one for like the super fast high power level cubes, but like anything below that, I think this is really cool.
Exactly, and that's kind of like the bucket that we're working in. Kind of, it's more. I think the first category is more like if you saw them in any cube, I think fine. Whereas these are a bit more like if I saw a Sublime Epiphany in like your cube, for example, I might think that might be a bit slow unless there is the Torrential Gearhulk way of cheating it. Because while all of these I think are powerful and can have their place, they are a bit more specific in where you're putting. So like the cheaper ones are more if you want to interact early. The more expensive ones are if that slower deck exists. That's why this section isn't as much in every cube. I think we should touch on next, James, counterspells that are for powerful cubes only. The first two are probably ones that people are shouting at their podcasting platform, like, why have we not touched on these? And that's Force of Will and Force of Negation. So let's talk about Force of Will first. So, Force of Will is 5 mana for an instant. You may pay 1 life and exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay Force of Will's mana cost, counter target spell. And Force of Negation is 1 blue for an instant. If it's not your turn, you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost, counter target non-creature spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So I'm going to make a hot take here, James. These are not good Magic cards. This is a hot take. These are not good Magic cards. These are necessary Magic cards. 2 for 1ing yourself is not like the basic fundamentals. Like if you've ever listened to like limited resources, 2 for 1ing yourself is never the position you want to be in. But sometimes you have to do it, otherwise you lose the game. These cards are necessary in powerful environments because they allow you to interact with your opponent either on turn 1 or when you have no mana. Basically the same thing, basically. They let you interact with your opponent when you have no mana. So similar to like Daze, for example, of like there is the possibility of the gotcha, like you're tapped out, haha, you didn't see the Force of Will come, etc. But there's also just the necessity of like, because like in the powerful cubes, you can go land Lotus, Minsk and Boo, and the game's over. Like these spells let you interact in those super fast environments. And again, like I know they are played in every format where they are legal, and I know that they are very, very strong Magic cards, but they are played because they are necessary, not because they are good. James thought.
I understand what you're saying. I'll also say that I think in Powered Cube, Force of Will is the best counterspell in Magic. I don't think it's close. And the reason for that is that so sure, there's sometimes you get into crazy turn 1s with a Black Lotus, and it's great there. But the thing that comes up more commonly for me is because like the 3 and 4 drops are so impactful now that the turn where you resolve your 3 drop and then Force of Will your opponent's 3 drop, that's such a huge swing that can often it's so hard for them to come back from that, you know. That can so frequently be the swing that ends the game. Like, you play your Minsk and Boo, they try and kill it, you Force of it. Yeah, like that's just the game, right? And I think it's become a lot more powerful in those cubes because the power level of threat used to be we used to have to pay 6 or 5 for those threats, right? And now we play 3 or 4. So we don't always have the ability to like hold up other permission of the previously the 3 or 4 mana spells were like I have a Coalition Relic. Like the Coalition Relic doesn't end the game. The 3 drops now end the game, and so Force of Will is like just when you're both slinging those haymakers, like Force of Will breaks that in a way that no other card does.
It's still that's right. Yeah, it still allows you to, unlike the other counterspells where you have to pause your game plan to stop their game plan. This lets you continue your game plan and stop them doing their game plan as well. Basically, you're not just
exactly.
it's not just because the worst thing with the counterspell is they don't play anything. You leave up mana for a counterspell and they don't do anything, or they then have an instant to do on your turn, something like that. Whereas Force of Will, the opportunity cost is all you need is a blue card in your hand, for example.
Yeah, for sure. But you make a good point about like normally when we say a card is only for high power because it would be completely busted in all the other cubes. That's not really the case with Force of Will. Like if you I've definitely like played pauper cubes where I don't think Force of Will would be a good card if I put it in, you know?
Yeah.
Because all the threats are so mopey and they're not worth 2 for 1ing yourself over, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I guess it's as intended in that scenario.
Yeah. Exactly. Like you put Force of Will in regular like limited draft environment and it wouldn't be that good. Like most of the threats just aren't worth 2 for 1ing yourself for. But as you ratchet up the power level, they really, really are. So you need a card like that. Force of Negation kind of can do some of the same things when it works, but it's way more narrow. And the thing where it doesn't work on your turn is actually huge.
Yeah, that is, yeah.
It means it doesn't protect your threats. Like, it's a card I will play in my controlling blue decks, but I will not take it that highly. Whereas Force of Will, like, I'm happy first picking and going into blue for it, you know?
All right, fine. I'm happy to admit that this vintage and legacy staple might be a good Magic, or might not be a bad card.
I didn't think Force of Will being good was a controversial statement.
No, I know. Got to get those clicks though somehow, James. Got to get that.
Yeah, if you go onto YouTube for the version of this this episode, you'll find Force of Will is a bad Magic card with a shocked face as the thumbnail.
I think we have a new title of the episode, maybe. No. Okay. Yeah. There is one other one I want to touch on, which to be fair, I guess I've always considered to be the most powerful counterspell, and that partly because it's not. Sometimes it's not actually run because it is too powerful, potentially, and that's Mana Drain. This is blue, counter target spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add an amount of colorless mana equal to that spell's mana value. Boy, if you want a tempo swing, this is backbreaking. This is an incredibly strong Magic card. And yeah, I've definitely played vintage cubes where this hasn't been run because it's been considered too... This is like Channel or like Contract from Below, something like that. It's just too kind of like out of the realm of like... Or the initiative. It's probably a better way to describe this. It's kind of like too swingy and backbreaky sometimes. Or like, I don't know if vintage cube is still like that, James. You do play a lot more of the vintage cube than I do, but kind of like getting the mana, stealing the mana investment on top of stopping their card is just extremely powerful. Kind of like what's your thoughts on Mana Drain, James?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a busted card. Like Counterspell is a card we're already really happy with. And you're getting, as a complete free roll off of that, you're getting a bunch of mana for free on your next turn. Like the games where it works and you like can mana drain their 3-drop and then cast a 6-drop, like the 6-drops are busted. The game is over. I will say, I suspect it is in those super high power level cubes probably a little bit less good than it used to be because
I could see that, yeah.
Yeah, partly because there's so much like downward pressure on the curves. You don't drain their expensive stuff that much, and quite often when you do get the mana drain off, you don't have anything to spend the mana on. Like because you're just not playing that many 4 and 5 drops, right? And often a lot of the like really good 3 and 4 drops are like gold cards. They're quite pip intensive, and this isn't to say it's not busted. It is busted. I think it's like slightly less busted than it has been at certain points in the past.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe the times I'm referring to are a bit longer away than I thought they were. They're kind of times when you would like hard casting a Thran Dynamo, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. Mana Drain your dude. I have Khan liberated, and I'm really happy about it. Yeah. But I mean, it's still cracked fair. Because the thing is, even if you're not using it to like play some 6-drop, like you mana drain that thing and then you like play your 3-drop on turn 4, but then you still have 3 more mana to play another 3-drop. That's
exactly.
Still crazy because you didn't give up anything for that mana, right? Counterspell was just a card you would put in your deck anyway.
I can definitely see it not being as strong as it used to, but I still think this is one that should only be played in powered.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, like even in I think Drain is too powerful for my unpowered vintage cube, and in theory, like a step or two below, and I think there'd be like the pack one, pick one quite easily in that environment.
Yes, for sure. I think it'd be very, very powerful, and it's also just like so punishing when it's like the counterspell would already have been great against the expensive card, and then your opponent just has all this extra mana, and it's really brutal. I wouldn't put it in anything except for like basically powered cube.
Was Mana Drain an uncommon, James?
I think it was. Yeah.
Oh, Jesus Christ! So This really falls into peasant. You have all the best counter spells, including apparently mana drain. You have Force of Will. Yeah, that looks. The Legends version looks to be an uncommon. Love that. Okay, hot, wild. So yeah, so kind of like those are the most powerful ones. Let's talk about some honorable mentions now. Like these are just some cool counter spells that I think we want to touch and just talk about a little bit, just because they have places in queues, but specifically in certain environments. Like Stern Scolding, I think is a very solid one that's seen quite a bit of play since it's released. It's a single blue counter-target creature spell with power toughness 2 or less. This one could almost be in the power-only one, because I feel that effectively this is here to counter like your Ragavan, your super cheap efficient threats, like your Inti, like your super cheap efficient, like what James is talking about, the curve coming down. Like this is there to get rid of those. So like I don't run this in any of my cubes, but like this is run in the Mitko Vintage Cube, I believe, right now, and I'm assuming it is specifically for those. Like it counters a Tameo, it counters most white 1-drops, it counters most, I mean, like red 1 and 2 drops. So I'm assuming that's kind of why Stern Scolding has seen quite a bit of play. Like
my gut is I don't think Stern Scolding's one for more mid-rangey or more budget cubes.
The power's more kind of like 3 mana, say, or things are a bit slower. I think Stern Scolding does get a bit lower, but like basically, yeah, in faster cubes, I think Stern Scolding is a very solid Magic card.
Yeah, I think it's pretty strong. It's very matchup dependent. The thing, like you play against Boros with your blue deck, and this is your best card. You play against another blue deck, and it's going to be one of your best.
Yeah, like this is nothing against kind of like Reanimator or anything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are like occasions, you play against the artifact deck, and you like this can snipe an Urza, for example.
Oh, that's hard actually. I do like that.
Yeah, and like there are just the odd expensive creature that this does counter. Like even like countering a Solitude is a huge game.
Ooh, Grief as well. Okay, yeah, okay, nice.
Yeah. But I think it earns its keep in a powered cube because it does answer some of those really quick starts. But and it does do the thing of like if still counter a surprising amount of the 3-drops, and countering a 3-drop for 1 mana is really good. But yeah, it does just have the being very matchup dependent issue. It's I generally will start it, but board it out very aggressively, sort of thing.
That's fair. And to be fair, that's a nice level for counterspell. Like I don't want my counterspells to sit in the sideboard and then come in. I want them to be in the main deck and then come out.
Yeah. Sure.
Another one that kind of I think is a bit more. Yeah, it's still an honorable mention, but I think is a bit more. But basically, because it's a gold slot, is invert polarity. Blue, red, instant, choose target spell, then flip a coin. If you win the flip, gain control of that spell, you may choose new targets for it. If you lose the flip, counter that spell. This is a very strong magic. Like, effectively, this is kind of a fixed mana drain, because you don't get the mana, but you potentially could get the spell, but the base level is still a counterspell. That is a high potential upside, and the floor is it's a 3 mana counterspell, admittedly over 2 colors. Why I think this is an honorable mention, not one for every cube, is because it takes up a gold slot in a cube. Gold slots are like it's harder for me to justify putting a counterspell in a gold, or putting a generic card in a gold slot, basically.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful card. I put it in my powered cube and then took it out just because I sort of realized I didn't like the play pattern very much.
Mm-hmm.
I know. I think this is maybe just a me thing, but for me, it's like kind of an unsatisfying way for a game to end, where because it's such a huge swing by when it works. Exactly. Well, like on a literal coin flip, like when you counter a planeswalker and then like you get the planeswalker, like that's just kind of the game a lot of time, right? And I kind of feel like Magic is high variance, which is fine. I think that's a good thing about the game, but we don't need to like artificially add in more variance with stuff like this, to me. And I just found it a bit like underwhelming when the games ended on that. It was like, oh, we're having a cool game, and we like flipped a coin in it, and that was kind of the whole thing. But maybe that might just be a me thing. I don't know.
No, I do see that. Like I think I've given out quite recently about Comet Stellar Pup on this podcast, and It's a similar feeling. If that, I guess it doesn't feel earned, if that makes sense.
Exactly. It's it feels almost like anticlimactic,
That's
when it
fair.
happens.
That's fair. I do think from a power level point of view, it's in the consideration because it is quite strong. But yeah, I do see from a gameplay point of view that it could just be a bit miserable, which is fair.
Yeah, no, power level wise, it's that.
Another counterspell I want to touch on, just because I think it's basically, I think this card's cool, but it does have a place in more slower cubes, and it's kind of is an example of a counterspell for something like my Treat Yourself cube, something like the chromatic cube or the Live the Dream cube, kind of like the cubes where you are trying to do bigger things, like stuff like Mana League would be the best card in that set, because everyone's trying to do things like this card. I think is perfect in those kind of environments, and is a great example of a budget card that I think is really cool in slower environments, and that's Rewind. I love Rewind. 2 blue for interrupt on the version I'm looking at is an instant. Counter target spell, untap up to 4 land. I think this is a great card. It's really solid. Again, now it is 4 mana, and that is the card showing its age a little bit, but it is a hard counter. And if you're in a deck with other instants or other flash targets, stuff like that, being able to, again, interrupt your opponent, stop their plan, but have the mana to continue your game plan is very strong. It does need those abilities to kind of like it is better if you can use the mana, because it just being a 4 mana counter spell, if you don't have anything to do, cool, it's a 4 mana counter spell. Hooray. Not great. But yeah, but if you have mana sink, stuff like that, I think it is quite good. And yeah, especially in those more slow environments, it can often be like the right level of intrigue, basically, or the right level of speed for some environments.
Yeah, I think Rewind's really cool. It's cool to have permission that's basically a build around, right? Like,
yeah,
you can't put Rewind in your deck if you don't have a bunch of other instants, because then it's actually just a 4 mana counterspell. If you have other instants, it's often a 0 mana counterspell. And really powerful. Yeah, really like Rewind. Yeah, assuming you want to do a Rewind, like the sort of easiest way to make it work is like instant speed card draw, right? You rewind their play and then draw a bunch of cards on their end step is a great feeling.
And moving it over a little bit, we have a creature now that I think is very strong. It's one that was a staple in cubes for quite a long time. It's probably been power crept out of the most powerful cubes, but it's Glenelendra Archmage. 3 in a blue, 2/2 creature fairy wizard with flying. And it has a single blue, sacrifice Glenelendra Archmage, counter target non-creature spell, but also has persist. So you get to do that twice. Glenelendra is a very cool, very annoying card. It's a hard counter, but it is a bit more specific. Like it effectively, this is countering their removal. Like it's not so much like this. Not countering creatures isn't the end of the world, but it will kind of help blip your opponent's answers to your thing. So it's a good roadblock if you're trying to build a game plan and you need that bit of protection. Kind of like most counter spells. We add counter spells to our deck generically because we're trying to interact with our opponents, and the protection is there, but it's not often. Like, if you're a combo deck, it can be the main reason you're running counter magic, but it's not always the main reason why you're running counter magic. For me, Glenelendra does feel a bit more protection-y in that it is a body they have to kill twice to get rid of. There is some nice play patterns there of kind of like, okay, I'll attack it, or I'll attack, maybe they'll block, that kind of stuff. There is some nice play patterns there. What do you think of Glenelendra, James?
Yeah, the card's really powerful in the right matchup. It's honestly like one of the most demoralizing cards sometimes, right?
Yeah.
When it counters everything in your deck and they manage to, you used to have out something and then they stick this, and you're just like, I'm going to have to pump 2 like proper spells into that, because they're not just going to snap it off on your ponder, right? Like, they're going to save it for high impact stuff. It's not that much mana to leave up. And it's not even like you can get out of it by exiling us or something, right? If you point at Swords to Plowshares at it, they just counter the Swords to Plowshares and it still persists back. Yeah, the card's great. Having said that, it's the reason you don't see it in a lot of super powerful cubes now is that those cubes are just more creature based than they used to be, right? And this is a lot of mana to spend on something, and then they just tap out for questing beasts and laugh at your fairy, and none of it matters. Yeah, in the right cube, it's great. like regular powered cube is not that cube anymore.
No, definitely. But like I think in slower cubes or cubes where like the power level is from a few years ago, I think Energy is still, yeah, it's a solid include, but yeah, not their power level. But I think it still definitely belongs on honorable mentions and does kind of bring us on to kind of like most of the ones we have talked about. For me, anyway, for them to get in, I do like ones that have the ability to counter any spell. There is a subset of counter spells that we should touch on, which are like things like Negate, Swan Song, and Spell Pierce. These are varying levels of counters or hard or soft counters or hard counters, but effectively they counter non-creature spells rather than countering all spells. I don't know how you feel about these, James. For me, these fall into being like we touched on it earlier, where like Stern Scolding starts in your deck and then goes to the sideboard. For me, these feel a bit more sideboardy into the deck if you know you're going to have threat hits, because like in theory, like you mentioned, decks are getting more creature heavy. Like Negate, Swan Song, Spell Pierce, and kind of like the spells that. So I'll read Negate. Sorry for those unaware. It's 1 on a blue, instant counter target non-creature spell. Hard counter for non-creature spells. It has the 1 on a blue. It's not double blue, so we like that from a casting point of view. But it doesn't. It's maybe going to hit
a quarter of our opponent's deck, maybe less. And then Spell Pierce is a single blue for an instant, counter target non-creature spell unless his controller pays 2. James, how do you feel about this subset of counter spells? The ones that can only do non-creature spells anyway.
I quite like Spell Pierce, actually. I think it's pretty strong. Like it's probably, I think, for me, in a lot of cubes, it's going to be the best of the 1-mana counters. Like I like it more than Boss Spike and Stern Scalding most of the time, because 2 is enough that you can quite reliably leave it up against the right deck, and you will get most of what they casted. It's live for a lot of the game because it's very cheap to leave up, and it can protect your creatures from removal or disrupt some of their threats. And it because it's only the 1 mana, it's not as expensive to leave up as like a Negate, right? Negate, I think, is too weak. I'd rather play, like, if you're paying 2 mana, you can get a Mana Leak or something, right? I think, which is just better because it will miss. Swan Song for me, I think, sucks because it hits
the body, yeah.
Yeah, it hits a narrower selection of stuff and it gives them a body. But yeah, Spell Pierce I do like just because the tempo swing when it works is so big, and I think it works enough of the time.
No, that's fair. I guess it's kind of similar to putting like a green protection spell. Like you will probably still run it in your deck if your plan is to land a creature. Is that fair?
Yeah,
like that?
And it hits it hits her planeswalkers, it hits card draw spells, even stuff like there's like the creatures that aren't creatures, like your fables and your equipment, all that nonsense, right? I just find it does enough to merit its spot. It's not like premium, but I think it's quite good.
No, I agree. Yeah.
I would still early. I would take like a Mana Leak, but I prefer it to the other sort of very conditional 1 mana counters.
No, I think that's fair. Cool. So as we kind of touched on the start, that is not an exhaustive breakdown of every single counterspell ever to be printed, but I think it does touch on the majority of ones that you are likely to see in the vast majority of cubes there. Again, that list will be down in the show notes below if you want to take it and apply it to your own cubes. I think if you choose a selection of the ones that we've gone through today, I think you'll have a very solid start and a very solid base for the counterspells in your cubes, and hopefully the conversations with me give you one, why to include them, and 2, like why they're good and kind of like how you can get the most out of them, basically. All right, awesome. Well, yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. James, pleasure, man. Thank you very much for the conversation. Really enjoy talking about my most hated form of cards, the counterspell, but I thought it was a good conversation to have.
I'm sure you will learn to love them at some point,
One day, James, one day. we'll see how it goes. But yeah, all right, now that's going to bring our episode to an end. James, pleasure. Thank you very much, man.
Always a pleasure.
Marvelous. That's going to do it for today. Do make sure the podcast review, tell a friend, all that good stuff. It is all greatly appreciated. Until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.